My family disowned me when I accused my sister of theft. Then I discovered our grandmother's dark secret that nobody knew. I can still close my eyes and feel it all rushing back. The smell of baked apples mixing with cinnamon. The rustling of my grandmother Eliza's apron as she moved around her kitchen like a dancer who knew every step by heart. I was 8 years old, perched on a wooden stool that wobbled just enough to make me feel like I was part of something important and slightly dangerous. She pulled out this beat-up notebook. Pages yellowed and stained with what looked like decades of butter fingerprints and vanilla extract spills. The spine was held together with duct tape that had probably been there since the Reagan years. She looked at me with those gray eyes that always seemed to know more than they should and told me something I'd never forget. She said recipes weren't just instructions. They were conversations with ghosts, and you had to be quiet enough to hear what they were trying to tell you. That notebook, it became my North Star. While other kids collected baseball cards or Pokemon, I collected moments in that kitchen. The way she'd test the dough's readiness by pressing it with her thumb. How she'd know the exact second to pull cookies from the oven by smell alone. She had 2 of those notebooks. Actually, one from her mother, one she'd filled herself. Together, they held nearly a century of family history, written in measurements and temperatures. Not everyone got it, though. God, did they not get it? Christmas when I was 15, I spent 3 days making gingerbread cookies for everyone. Hand-pipe decorations, each one unique. My dad took one look at them, set his aside untouched, and handed me a toolbox. Said maybe next year I could make something useful, like fixing the porch steps that had been creaking since I was 12. The irony wasn't lost on me that those steps still creak today. My sister Clara? She was worse in her own special way. Always called my baking a cute little hobby, with that smile that looked supportive if you didn't know her. The same smile she used when she got into Harvard Business School, while I was wasting time at culinary school. The same smile she wore when she landed that consultant job making 6 figures while I was selling cupcakes at farmers markets. But here's the thing about family recipes. They don't care about Harvard or 6-figure salaries. They're democratic that way. When Grandma passed 5 years ago, those notebooks became my inheritance. Not legally, mind you. There was no will saying, Leo gets the recipes. But everyone knew. Even Clara knew. Or at least, I thought she did. Fast forward to last Sunday. Family dinner at my parents' place. You know the drill. Mom makes too much food. Dad complains about property taxes. And everyone pretends we're the Cleavers for a few hours. I brought Grandma's apple pie. The real deal. 3 types of apples, lattice crust made with actual lard like she taught me, and that secret ingredient she made me swear I'd never tell anyone about. Clara barely touched it. 1 tiny forkful, then that smile again. She started talking about how quaint it was, how authentic, how the market was really craving this kind of rustic narrative right now. She used air quotes around rustic. Air quotes. About Grandma's pie. Then she said something about elevation, about taking these recipes to the next level, about untapped potential. I should have seen it coming. 28 years of being her brother, and I still fell for it. 3 days later, she called. Her voice was different, softer, almost apologetic. She said she'd been too harsh at dinner, that she wanted to understand what I did better. Could she come see my workshop? Maybe learn a thing or two. The thing about growing up as a family disappointment is that when someone finally shows interest, you grab onto it like a lifeline, even when that someone has a history of throwing you anchors disguised as life preservers. She came over that Thursday with fancy coffee from that place downtown that charges $8 for a latte. She oohed and awed at my converted garage workspace, asked about my process, touched the worn wooden spoons hanging on the wall like they were museum pieces. For 45 minutes, I had a sister who cared about what I cared about. Then she asked to use the bathroom. Simple request, right? Nothing suspicious about needing to pee. I kept talking to myself in the kitchen, actually practicing what I'd say about the molecular structure of gluten development, thinking she'd want to hear it when she came back. Pathetic, I know. I remember watching her walk past my kitchen, her eyes lingering on the shelf where I kept the notebooks. Just a glance. Nothing more. Her designer purse, one of those massive things that probably cost more than my rent, swung against her hip. She was in the bathroom for maybe 3 minutes. Came back. Chatted for another 20 minutes about market opportunities and scaling potential, then left with a hug that felt almost real. The next night, I went to grab the notebooks for my evening prep. My hand hit empty shelf. Just empty, dusty with where they'd lived for 5 years. First thought, I'd move them. Had to have moved them. Spent an hour tearing apart my apartment. Checked the freezer, because once I'd accidentally put my keys in there. Checked my car. Checked places that made no sense, like inside the washing machine. The realization crept in like fog. That glance, that oversized purse, the sudden interest in my work. The pieces clicked together with the sound of a lock turning. No way. Not even Clara would. But she would. Of course she would. My hands shook as I called her. Actually shook like I was some character in a bad movie. She answered on the second ring, voice bright and corporate cheerful. When I asked about the notebooks, there was this pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, I heard everything. The calculation, the decision, the commitment to the lie. Her voice turned concerned, therapeutic almost. She said I sounded overwhelmed lately, that I'd seemed a little scattered at dinner. She reminded me how I'd misplaced my keys last month, how I'd forgotten Mom's birthday until the last minute. She said the notebooks were probably somewhere safe, that stress does strange things of memory. Maybe I'd put them somewhere special and forgotten. Had I been sleeping okay? Eating enough? The farmer's market must be taking its toll. She offered to come help me look for them. Tomorrow, she said, we'd search together. Like when we were kids and I'd lose my action figures. Her voice was so warm, so sisterly, that for a second I almost believed her. Almost believed I was a crazy one. The thing about gaslighting is that it works best when there's already doubt. When you're already the family screw-up who chose whisks over spreadsheets. When you've already been told 1,000 times that your priorities are backward. She knew exactly what she was doing. I stood there in my kitchen after she hung up, looking at that empty shelf. No proof, no witnesses, just my word against hers. And we both knew whose word carried weight in our family. Harvard versus culinary school. 6 figures versus farmers markets. The successful consultant versus the guy who thinks recipes talk to him. The empty shelf stared back at me in the lamplight. A gap-toothed smile where my inheritance used to live. The overpriced coffee she brought was still sitting on my counter. Cold now. $8 of fake concern. I'd thank her for it. Hug her goodbye. Let her walk out with everything that mattered tucked in that designer purse. There was nothing but the absolute, crushing certainty of what had happened. My sister had looked me in the eye, touched my grandmother's spoons like they were precious, and robbed me blind. And now she was making me doubt if it even happened. I sank down onto my kitchen floor, back against the cabinets. The same floor where Grandma had taught me to crack eggs with one hand. The same floor where I'd spill flour, and she'd laughed instead of scolded. Now it was just cold linoleum under my palms. The notebooks were gone. The ghosts were silent. And I was exactly what my family always said I'd be. Alone. For 3 months after that phone call, I did nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just went through the motions at the farmer's market on Saturdays, smiled at customers who complimented my sourdough, and came home to stare at that empty shelf. You know that feeling when you lose a tooth and your tongue keeps finding the gap? That was my brain with those notebooks. Every recipe I tried to recreate came out wrong. Too sweet. Too dense. Missing something I couldn't name. Then one morning in April, my phone exploded. Not literally, though that would have been less painful. 17 notifications before I'd even had coffee. My old culinary school roommate had sent me an Instagram link with just 3 question marks. No words needed. Elevated Roots. That was the account name. Clean, minimalist logo. Already 12,000 followers. The bio read like a Hallmark card, had a baby with a LinkedIn profile. Something about honoring heritage while embracing innovation. Sustainable. Artisanal. All the buzzwords that make venture capitalists weak in the knees. The first photo stopped my heart. Grandma's apple pie. But not just any photo. This thing looked like it belonged in Bon Appetit. Perfect lighting catching the steam rising from the lattice. A rustic wooden table that probably cost more than my car. And the caption? God, the caption. Clara had written this whole story about discovering the recipe in an old trunk in her apartment. How she'd been experimenting for months to perfect it. How each apple represented a different generation of strong women in our family. She'd even named it the Heritage Harvest Pie. $47 at her new bakery location in the fancy part of town. $47 for something Grandma used to make with apples from a neighbor's tree and lard from the corner store. I scrolled. Every post was another theft wrapped in professional photography. The Christmas cookies I'd spent 3 days perfecting were now Mindful Moments meditation cookies. The banana bread Grandma made when bananas went brown was transformed into a waste-conscious warrior loaf. She'd turned our family's entire history into content. #authentic. #women supporting women. #blessed. But the lavender honey cake, that one broke something in me. See, Grandma created that recipe for my 10th birthday. I'd been going through this phase where I wanted everything purple, shoes, backpack, even tried to convince Mom to let me dye my hair. Grandma spent weeks perfecting a cake that was naturally purple from butterfly pea flowers, sweetened with honey from her friend hives. It was just for me, our secret. Clara went on morning television with that cake. I watched the clip on YouTube, sitting on my bathroom floor, because somehow that felt appropriate. She sat there in a designer dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. Actual tears rolling down her cheeks as she told the host about her grandmother teaching her this recipe. How they'd spend hours in the kitchen together. How the lavender represented resilience and the honey symbolized the sweetness that comes from hard work. The host ate it up, called her an inspiration. The comment section was full of heart emojis and women saying she'd motivated them to connect with their own family traditions. 300,000 views in 2 days. The Today Show wanted her for a segment. Food Network reached out about a possible show. I became a detective of my own life. Screenshot everything. Compiled timestamps showing when I posted similar recipes on my tiny blog that maybe 12 people read. Found photos from family dinners where those exact dishes appeared years before her sudden culinary awakening. I had proof. Mountains of it. Folders organized by date. Cross-reference with her posts. After 11 months of this torture, I finally worked up the courage to take it all to my parents. Printed everything out. Cost me $43 at FedEx office. Had it all in a binder with tabs and everything. Like I was presenting a case to the Supreme Court of Family Justice. But Clara, she's always been 3 steps ahead. Always. While I was playing checkers, she was playing that 3D chess they have on Star Trek. The morning I planned to talk to my parents, she dropped her nuclear bomb. Business Insider. That's where she published it. Not some small blog or industry newsletter. Business Insider. The headline alone made me want to throw my phone to the window. Elevated Root CEO opens up about family betrayal. How to build a business when your own blood tries to tear you down. She never mentioned me by name. Legally perfect, but every detail was there, twisted just enough. The struggling relative who'd always resented her success. The family member who claimed ownership of shared heritage. The threats she'd received. The attempts to sabotage her business. She painted herself as this warrior woman protecting her grandmother's legacy from a bitter relative who wanted to profit off what he could never create himself. The article went viral. Entrepreneur Twitter ate it up. LinkedIn was full of think pieces about tall poppy syndrome and how success triggers family jealousy. She got interviewed on 3 different podcasts that week about resilience and boundaries. Someone started a hashtag, Stand with Clara. I'm not making that up. Stand with Clara was trending. My mom called me that afternoon. Her voice was tight, disappointed. She'd read the article. Everyone had read the article. She wanted to know how I could do this to my sister, to the family. Didn't I realize how hard Clara had worked? Why couldn't I just be happy for her success? I tried to explain. Tried to show her the binder I'd made, but she wouldn't even look at it. Said I needed to examine why I was so obsessed with tearing down a successful woman. Those were her exact words. Like she downloaded them straight from Clara's PR team. The meeting with both parents happened 2 days later. I drove to their house with that stupid binder, knowing it was useless but unable to stop myself. Hope is a weird drug that way. Makes you do things logic tells you are pointless. Dad was sitting in his recliner when I walked in. Didn't even get up. Mom stood by the kitchen door, like she was ready to run if I got violent or something. The TV was muted but still on. Some game show where people won money for answering obvious questions. Felt appropriate somehow. I started talking. Showed them the receipts, the photos, the timeline. My voice cracked twice. Probably looked exactly as pathetic as Clara's article made me sound. Dad let me finish, then leaned back in his chair with this look. You know the one. The same look he had when I quit pre-med, when I chose culinary school, when I moved back home after my restaurant job fell through. He said the world had already made its choice. That Clara was a creator, a builder, someone who made things happen. And me, after that article, I was a destroyer, the bitter relative everyone has, the one who can't stand watching others succeed. He said they had to think about the family's reputation, about their own standing in the community. They chose her. Those words hit different when your dad says them. Not yelling, not angry, just matter of fact. Like he was telling me the weather forecast. Cloudy with a chance of complete abandonment. Mom tried to soften it. Said maybe after some time, after I got help for my issues, we could try to rebuild. But I needed to apologize to Clara first. Publicly. Maybe write my own article about how jealousy had clouded my judgment. How I was seeking therapy for my problems. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because what else do you do when your reality becomes that absurd? When the thieves want you to apologize for being robbed. That's when Dad stood up, told me I should leave. Not angry, not dramatic. Just done. Like I was a door-to-door salesman who'd overstayed my welcome. Mom walked me to the door, whispered that she loved me, but I needed to fix myself. The door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. I sat in my car in their driveway for 20 minutes. Couldn't seem to make my hands turn the key. The porch light turned off while I was sitting there. They turned off the porch light while their son sat in the driveway. That's when I knew I wasn't just alone. I was erased from this family exactly as much as those recipes were erased from my life. The farmer's market stopped returning my calls a week later. Turns out Clara's article had made the rounds. Nobody wants to buy bread from the bitter relative who tried to destroy his successful sister's business. My Instagram followers dropped from 300 to 47. The comments on my old posts were brutal. Lots of snake emojis. Lots of people telling me to seek help. 3 weeks after that parent meeting, I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling through job postings for line cooks, considering whether Applebee's was hiring, whether I could handle making microwaved appetizers for tourists. Rock Bottom has a basement, turns out, and I was shopping for furniture down there. Then I saw it, Zillow notification on my phone. I'd set it up years ago when I had this fantasy about buying Grandma's house someday, keeping it in the family. The notification was simple, price change on saved property. Grandma's house was for sale, listed 3 days ago. The realtor had staged it with generic furniture that looked like it came from a catalog called Memories Not Included. They'd painted over her yellow kitchen walls with something called agreeable gray. The photos made it look like every other house on the market. Nothing special. Nothing worth saving. The listing described it as a charming fixer-upper with great bones and potential. Potential. Like it hadn't already been everything. Like it hadn't held 60 years of Thanksgiving dinners and birthday parties and Grandma teaching me to fold butter into dough at that kitchen table they'd already hauled away. Clara was selling it. Of course she was. She'd gotten the stories, the recipes, the reputation. The actual house was just real estate now. Just square footage and property value. The last physical proof that any of it had been real was being turned into someone else's potential. I sat there in my apartment, Looking at those listing photos, the empty rooms looked smaller without Grandma's things. The kitchen seemed confused without the smell of bread. Even the windows looked different, like they'd forgotten what they were supposed to be looking at. Everything was gone. The notebooks, the family, the house, my name, my history, my whole reason for being who I thought I was. All of it repacked and sold while I sat in an apartment that smelled like failure and microwave dinners. The listing price was reasonable, market appropriate, the kind of number that would move fast in this economy. By next month, someone else would be living there, making their own memories. Maybe they'd even bake in that kitchen, never knowing that it had once been a place where recipes talked to people who knew how to listen. I closed the app, turned off my phone, sat in the dark because somehow that felt more honest. The silence was complete. The realtor gave me 48 hours. 2 days to clear out whatever I wanted from Grandma's house before the estate sale people came in to tag everything with little white stickers. 48 hours to say goodbye to the place that raised me more than my actual parents did. I showed up with cardboard boxes from Home Depot and a U-Haul reservation I couldn't afford. The house already smelled different, like emptiness has its own scent, a mix of old dust and fresh disappointment. Clara had taken what she wanted months ago, apparently. The good furniture. The vintage KitchenAid mixer that still worked better than anything made today. All gone. What was left looked like the bones of someone's life. Mismatched dishes, faded curtains, the recliner with the broken lever that you had to kick just right to make it recline. The valuable stuff was gone, leaving only the things that mattered. I started in the kitchen. Found her coffee mug, the one with the chip on the handle from when I knocked it off the counter at age 7. She'd use it every morning anyway, said the chip, gave it character. I wrapped it in newspaper, like it was made of gold. The attic was my last stop. Had to be. Too many summers spent up there, hiding from the heat and the world, reading her old romance novels while she pretended not to know where I was. The ladder creaked the same way it always had, third rung from the top. Muscle memory is weird like that. Your body remembers things your mind tries to forget. Up there, surrounded by Christmas decorations from the 70s and boxes labeled in her careful script, I remembered something. I was maybe 9, 10 at most. We were playing pirates, because that's what you do when you're 9, and your grandmother's cooler than any adult has a right to be. She'd pointed at the floorboards near the window, where the afternoon light made patterns through the dusty air. She'd winked and said that's where she kept her real treasures, the ones too important for banks or safety deposit boxes. Kids believe everything. Adults forget to believe anything. But standing there at 28, desperate and angry and grasping for any piece of her that Clara hadn't monetized, I decided to be 9 again. The floorboard looked like all the others, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. But when I pressed on one end, the other lifted just enough to get my fingers under. It came up with a groan that sounded like secrets being told. Underneath was a wooden box. Cedar by the smell, the kind they used to make Hope chests from, back when Hope came in chest form. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that fell apart at my touch, were letters, dozens of them. The paper was that thin airmail kind they used during the war. The writing was hers, but younger, looser, like she hadn't figured out who she was going to be yet. They were addressed to my grandfather, somewhere in France, 1944. I'd never met him. He came back from the war, gave Grandma 2 kids, then died of a heart attack before I was born. These letters were her side of a conversation I'd never knew existed. I started reading. The first few were what you'd expect. Miss you. Love you. The neighbors are gossiping about the Johnsons again. Little things to make a soldier feel connected to home. But then I found it. Page 3 of a letter dated October 1944. She was describing a church bake sale, how her apple pie had won second place, and then, she'd written out the recipe. Her exact words were about wanting him to know everything about her life, even the small victories. My hand shook. Here it was. Proof, written in her hand, dated before Clara was even a possibility. The recipe that launched Elevated Roots, documented decades before my sister claimed to have discovered it in some fictional trunk. I kept reading, fevered now, found more recipes scattered through the letters. The Christmas cookies, the banana bread she made to use up the rationed fruit. Each one proof that these were ours, were hers, were real. I'd won. Finally, absolutely, undeniably won. But I kept reading. Because that's the thing about truth. Once you start pulling at thread, you can't stop just because you like the pattern you're seeing. The letters changed as I went backward in time, reading in reverse order. Her handwriting got tighter, more careful, like she was holding something in. And then I reached the earliest letters, the ones from 1943, and everything I thought I knew fell apart. The handwriting was different in places. Shaky, words crossed out and rewritten. And the tone, God, the tone. She wasn't sharing recipes anymore. She was confessing. She wrote about the other women in town. Mrs. Patterson with her famous cornbread. Mrs. Chun with her dumplings that everyone pretended not to love because of Pearl Harbor. The Kowalski sisters with their pierogies. And how none of them would share. How they held their recipes like weapons, like currency, like the only power they had in a world that didn't give women much of anything. So she took them. That's what she wrote. She took them, stayed after church socials to help clean, and memorized what she saw. Pretended to be worse at cooking than she was, so they'd show her things, correcting her mistakes. Listen at windows. Went through trash to find recipe cards thrown out in fits of anger. She wrote to my grandfather about the guilt eating her alive. How Mrs. Patterson had cried when Grandma's cornbread, the stolen cornbread, won the county fair. How she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't look these women in the eye. But she couldn't stop either, because those recipes were their only chance at something better after the war. A bakery, maybe, a restaurant, something that could be theirs. The last letter, or the first, depending on how you counted, was the worst. She'd been caught. Mrs. Chun had seen her copying down measurements at a church potluck, had called her out quietly, in that devastating way that only happens when someone is too dignified to make a scene. Grandma wrote about the shame of it, the way the other women looked at her after, not with anger, but with something worse. Understanding. They all knew what she'd done. They all knew why. I sat on that attic floor for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. The evening light was doing that thing where it turns everything golden, making even dust look like magic. But I couldn't see magic anymore. Just dust. Everything was a lie. Every story, every tradition, every moment I'd held sacred. Grandma hadn't created anything. She'd stolen it all. And Clara, Christ, Clara hadn't even stolen from us. She'd just continued a family tradition she didn't even know existed. For a moment, I hated them both. Grandma for building my entire identity on theft. Clara for turning that theft into a corporate empire. I wanted to burn the letters, post them online, destroy everything and everyone who'd made me believe I was part of something real. But anger is exhausting when you're already empty. It burns through you fast when there's no fuel left. What replaced it was worse. Understanding. The kind that comes when you realize everyone's drowning, and they're all just grabbing whatever they can stay afloat. Grandma stole because she was desperate. A woman in the 40s with no education, no opportunities, nothing but her hands and whatever she could make with them. She stole survival. Clara stole because she was empty. All that success, all those degrees, all that money, and she needed something real. Something that meant something. She stole meaning. And me? What had I been trying to steal back? Not recipes. Not really. I'd been trying to steal back the feeling of being special, of mattering, of being the keeper of something sacred. We were all thieves. Every one of us. The only difference was what we were trying to steal and who we were stealing from. I put the letters back in the box. Carefully, like they were evidence in a crime that no longer mattered. The floorboard went back down. The attic dust resettled. But I took the box with me. Not sure why. Maybe because someone should know the whole truth. Maybe because I needed proof that even beautiful things can be built on lies. The next morning, I called Clara. First time since she'd gaslit me about the notebooks. Her assistant put me through immediately, which meant Clara had been expecting this call. She knew about the house sale, knew I'd be there, was probably wondering what I'd found. We met at the house that afternoon. She showed up in her Tesla, dressed like she was going to a board meeting. I was in the same jeans I'd worn to clear the attic, with dust in my hair and probably tears dried on my face. We looked like before and after photos of success. I'd made Grandma's apple pie that morning, the real one, from memory, because that's all I had left. It sat on the kitchen counter next to the box of letters, looking ordinary and perfect. The kitchen still smelled like cinnamon and butter, like home, like lies, like love. Clara saw the box and knew. I don't know how, but she knew. Her face did this thing where all the corporate polish cracked just for a second. She looked young suddenly, like the sister who used to split her Halloween candy with me even though I'd eaten all mine already. I pushed the box toward her. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. She opened it, read the first letter, then the second. I watched her face change as she understood what she was reading, what it meant, what we both were. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. Not crying. Clara didn't cry anymore. But wet. I asked her one question. Simple. The only one that mattered. I asked her what she was really trying to build. Because Grandma stole survive, but Clara didn't need to survive. She was already at the top. So what was she doing? What was the point of taking something that was already built on taking? She didn't answer, not with words. But she looked at that pie, then at the letters, then at me. And I saw it, the recognition. She wasn't stealing recipes or stories or heritage. She was stealing connection. The same thing I'd been trying to protect. The same thing Grandma had been trying to create. We were all so damn lonely we'd eat each other alive just to feel like we belonged to something. I told her she could keep the letters. The recipes were already hers anyway, apparently. Had been hers before any of us were born, stolen and restolen so many times that ownership was just another story we told ourselves. But I asked her to think about what she wanted her story to be. Because Grandma's story was about survival. But Clara had survived. She'd won. So what came after winning? I left the pie on the counter when I walked out. Let her decide what to do with it, whether to eat it, sell it, Instagram it, or just let it go cold. It wasn't my inheritance to protect anymore. That was 6 months ago. I teach cooking classes now at the community center downtown. Minimum wage plus whatever the city can scrape together for programs nobody important cares about. Kids from the neighborhood come after school. Most of them can't afford ingredients to practice at home, so we make do with whatever the food bank gives us. Last week, we made apple pie. I taught them Grandma's recipe, or Mrs. Patterson's recipe, or whoever's recipe it really was before it became ours. Told them the truth about it, too. How recipes travel. How they change hands and names and stories but somehow stay themselves. How the best things are usually stolen from someone who stole them from someone else. This one kid, Marcus, maybe 11 years old, asked if that made it okay to steal. Fair question. I told him no, but also yes, but also it's complicated. That the difference between stealing and sharing is mostly about whether you admit where things came from, whether you honor the chain of hands that held something before it got to you. The director pulled me aside yesterday, said an anonymous donor had given enough money to renovate the entire kitchen. New ovens, real equipment, enough to run classes year-round instead of just summers. The donation came with a note. 3 words, for real heritage. I knew. Of course I knew. Clara is trying to find her way back to something true, or forward to something better. I don't know if she's changed the story she tells about her recipes. Don't follow elevated routes anymore. Can't. But she's trying to do something with the truth. That's enough. Has to be. This morning, Marcus showed up early to help set up. He'd practiced the pie crust at home, using flour from the dollar store and butter his mom got on sale. It was terrible, tough as leather and burnt on one edge. But he was so proud, so absolutely convinced he'd created something special. I told him he had, because that's how it works. You take what someone gives you, add your own failures and successes, and pass it on. The theft becomes gift, becomes tradition, becomes truth. Not the fact kind of truth. The real kind. The kind that feeds people. When the other kids showed up, Marcus taught them what he'd learned. Watched him showing this girl Sarah how to cut butter into flour. His hands confident even though his pie crust had been garbage. Teaching what he barely knew. Sharing what he hardly had. I looked at my own hands. Covered in flour again. Always covered in flour. Like Grandma's. Like Clara's probably were now. In some test kitchen somewhere. Trying to find her way back to what matters. We all had the same hands, really. Stealing, sharing, making, taking. Try to feed something in ourselves by feeding others. The notebooks are still gone. Will stay gone. But the recipes? The real recipes? They were never in those notebooks anyway. They were in the trying, in the failing, in the showing up every week to teach kids who might not remember my name, but will remember that someone thought they were worth teaching. That's the heritage, not the recipes, not the stories, not even the truth about where it all came from. The heritage is in the hunger to make something that feeds people, even if you have to steal to do it, even if what you're stealing was already stolen. Even if the whole damn thing is built on generations of women taking what they needed to survive. Marcus burned another pie crust yesterday. Sarah's cookies came out flat as pancakes. Another kid named Devin somehow made bread that could have been used as a weapon. They all ate everything anyway. Laughed with their mouths full. Asked when they could come back. Tomorrow, I told them. Same time. Same stolen recipes. Same flour-covered hands reaching for something that might feed us all. That's the only inheritance that matters. The rest is just stories we tell while the bread is rising.